Welcome back to Men Talking Mindfulness. Today we kick off season number 7. We're like you believe it, John? 7 seasons of me and you doing this whole thing. Hey, we appreciate you listening to the show and helping us grow this mindfulness community. As John and I continue to teach self-awareness and continue to adopt our own mindfulness lifestyle, one of the biggest challenges we continually confront is dealing with our emotions. I'm sure that most of you can relate to a circumstance where your emotions got the best of you, one where you overreacted in an unskillful manner that left you feeling regretful or ashamed of what you did or what you said, or most likely both. This happens all too often, and we are living in an environment where emotional reactivity seems to be the norm for most of the population. When we live in this reactive state, we stop listening, we get defensive, our minds start racing with stressful thoughts, and solutions to problems seem impossible. What if, instead of reacting unskillfully and adding to the drama, you develop a skillful approach by responding to circumstances, whatever the situation, responding with a cool head, an open mind, a relaxed body? What is possible now? To help us understand how to acquire the necessary skills for a responsive approach to life, we would like to introduce our guest today, Dr. Charles Freligh. Charles is a clinical psychologist. Freligh, John, I was in a flow. Okay. I know, like, raw, uncut, unapologetic, but I apologize, Charles Freligh, right, for saying your last name incorrect. Freligh. Okay, free, with one F. Okay, Freligh. Okay, Charles Freligh. Charles is a clinical psychologist with many years of therapeutic experience, working with individuals and groups, as well as teaching at universities as an adjunct professor. Charles continually sharpens his mindfulness practices by annually attending and spending time at a Zen monastery to train in meditation and spiritual disciplines, although he does not consider himself a Buddhist. Charles is so dedicated to helping others. He recently published his first book, The Will to Do Nothing, and co-hosts the What Is Now podcast with his friend and colleague, Zapik Rezvi. Did I get that right? Rezvi? Oh, yeah, close. Really close. Saka Rizvi. It's great to be back, everybody. You can see we really haven't changed too much, even though we're in a new season. So thank you so much for tuning in. Charles, thank you so much for joining the show today. Before we dive in and learn more about reacting versus responding, I'm excited to say hello to my great friend and ball-busting friend and my beloved and your beloved co-host, John McCaskill. What's up, John? Great to be back. How have you been? Freligh, Charles Freligh. Okay, everyone's gonna know your name. No, yeah, I appreciate that, and because there's so many different ways of talking about the same thing, and sometimes like we resonate with one voice or one teacher or another or a way of it being said, and so this conversation though is the foundation of all these practices, or it's like one of the major concepts of mindfulness and meditation, or all these contemplative and practices that kind of try to get us into our true self. So I'm so glad to have this conversation. I'm so glad you're joining us today, Charles. Thank you. Yeah. Why are you so personally invested in this work, and what's your grand vision, if you will? Yeah. Yeah. A million listeners. That's it, man. Yeah. 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 I love them. Huh. Yeah. This too shall pass. It's if we get attached to that feeling and then start judging ourselves, then that's when we get stuck. That's when we turn into the ice cube. But if we just keep flowing and just be with the experience, even like I like what you're saying, just acknowledge, that feeling. And then it gives us, that's why the practices are so great. Is, if I'm feeling anxious, I can feel my feet, I can take a breath, I can change in that state. So the language is very important, I feel, and knowing and experiencing and what the body is doing. And that's really activating the mind is what the body's doing. And also, obviously, the way we're interpreting the world and this conversation in the mind. But I think that's why these practices are so incredibly important, because we're never in one steady state. We're not in a stagnant state. We're always flowing. We're always moving. We're always going from one thing to the next. But I think when we begin to practice, and we'll talk about what these practices can look like, and ones that are very effective for overcoming getting responsive and being responsive to yourself and not reacting would be like, oh, I'm a piece of shit, I'm angry, or I'm anxious, or I'm angry. It's like judging yourself versus responding, and that's when you'd be like, okay, feeling a little bit flustered, feeling a little this, maybe I'm not saying the best words right now, but you know what? It doesn't matter, because I think what has really helped me become a better teacher, a better speaker, a better human being is just owning my experience, whatever it is. And then also the trust that comes in from the practices and the confidence that I developed from the practices, because I know how to relax. I know what it's like to be in this state of flow. I know what it's like to be in a relaxed state of being, a relaxed state of mind, and just trust, I think, is a big part of grounding yourself into the here and now. And also, let me know if your experiences are like this as well. Like when I do get into that rested space, I'm not just connecting with you guys, connecting to myself, but I'm also like, there's a divine intervention, if you will, that starts to flow through me, because I'm getting like little like hives, like just talking about, I just become a conduit for the work itself. But the only way that I really am able to get there is by being calm and present, but I'm only able to get to that place by practicing and stopping. We're going to talk about doing nothing and how incredibly important that is in order to get to this relaxed state of being and just letting things just be as they are and not judging yourself as you move through them. I mean, in both. When I'm teaching, for sure, it depends. Like I teach a lot of meditation, a lot of yoga, and like breath practices. So I'm very confident and very grounded in them. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I know what I want them to learn. But even like in just conversations, sometimes I'm like, wow, where is this coming from? Just stuff just coming through me. So it could be both, but I think you only get there is when you let go of the judgment, you let go of that reactivity, you let go of the criticism, that imposter syndrome, the narrative, the destructive narrative in the background, and just get to peace with being a human being. Is where we're flawed, we make mistakes, we're gonna screw up. And the more I think you also give yourself that permission to do that and get a little ugly and be a little embarrassed, you realize the next morning, oh, I'm still alive. You know what I mean? It's what's next. You know what I mean? Like how, and then I also put myself in those situations. So I want to fail, if you will. So then I get some more knowledge because the results that I get back, and then I try a little bit differently another time. And you just grow and grow, and you get with this, Dr. Seth, we'll mention him again, you come into this unfuckable nature. Just be unfuckable. And because that means you're not fucking with yourself either. Anyway, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, my God, yeah. Yeah. And also blocks the connection to the other person too. You like start to put up a wall because it's no longer a dynamic exchange. We're both in our heads and we're both analyzing, judging, criticizing, and it just becomes whatever. It's meaningless in that regard. And that's what we're really trying to get to, right? The meaning of things. The experience that I'm having and the meaning I'm bringing forth through that experience. This is great. Should we anything else on this? Because I'd love to jump into the R versus the R, reacting versus the responding. Anything else, Charles? Okay. Well, let's just, because we're really at the top of the screen, learning to respond without reacting. So let's just break down our audiences. I like to say we have a sophisticated audience. They've been listening to us for quite some time. We definitely have touched on this topic quite a bit. But give us the basic of, if you will, of mind and body, of responding versus reacting, and what that looks like, and give us that POV of the psychology and the physiology of when we're in either state of responsiveness or versus reactivity. Yeah. 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 That's it. Yeah. Getting physical as well, going for a walk. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Oh, take the course. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think it's also important because, well, how long you've been practicing? How long you've been in the game? I guess if you could say. Yeah. So there is, what I'm alluding to is you're able to bounce back so quickly because of the foundation you've created on the inside. And so anybody that's listening out there, it could happen in a minute. It could happen in 3 breaths, and that's great. But if you're like very new to, and just really understanding what we're saying or catching half of what we're saying, and hopefully we are making a lot of sense. It's not just, again, it's not an intellectual thing, it's an embodiment, it's a mind-body connection that the only way we really get to know that connection is sitting, getting quiet, meditating, using our breath. And exercise is great, going to the gym, walking, but still getting into that space of doing nothing and to really begin to establish this foundation, get to know our practice, get to see our mind and all of its ridiculous thinking, whatever, and what it wants to do, but also all the feelings that come along with that. And once we get in touch with it, that's when we can start making changes. That's when we can, and experiencing those changes on a daily basis and a moment-to-moment basis, like gives us that trust, gives us that confidence, so we can begin to make those changes really quickly. But why don't we talk about that whole, you have in your little questionnaire we gave out to you, like that whole idea of doing nothing, and why is that so important? And because it's something I say often when I teach, it's like if you want to be better at doing things, then you got to get really good at doing nothing sometimes. So what is that? So let's dive in there. Bang. I love it. You've hit all of my favorites, man. I love Frankl, yeah. Man's search for meaning. Right. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Talk about it a little bit, sure. Let's get our audience informed, please. Right. Psilocybin, yeah. H and N, here and now, right? It's the only time it ever is. Yeah. There you go, yeah. Yeah. I think it all is flowing together and it's all making sense to me. But yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's also, it's like, I like what you're, yeah. Yeah, right? It takes some practice though. And I think what I like what you're saying about the knowing your trains, if you will, that's how you get to know your mind. But the only way you get to know your mind is if you actually sit and watch your mind. And it's also, the mind is very, if you're having some sort of very somatic or physical experience in some ways, like that could be really triggering the mind. So when you really, again, take time to do nothing, take time to meditate, take time to breathe, just sitting and breathing for 10 minutes is a meditation in itself. But you can really, like, I just can't stress enough, to do nothing, to practice, and that's when you could really make some changes, because if you never really have done any of this work, and then you're not gonna, we're trained as people in the United States to be of mind so much. Right? To think of the way that we talk about our children or our friends, oh, they're so smart, oh, this or that. They're not, you don't hear people say very often, oh, he's so present, or he has so much emotional control. It's not as sexy, if you will, as, oh, they're so smart. And then by just even saying that, it feeds the ego of the community, if you will, to be smarter, to learn more things. And that's just, we just keep piling on over top of what really matters, which is this embodied experience, which is getting into the here and now, knowing or seeing our mind as just a tool instead of being controlled by this tool. And we can really start making some big differences and shifting into that very satisfying and very rewarding, responsive nature that takes some practice to get to, because of the default mode network, the way our mind is designed up to this point in our evolutionary biology. It's been here to protect us, but things have gotten so comfortable in our lives that we don't really have to be continually locked in the survival mode, which is that reactive nature. And yeah, how do we do this? So what practices would you prescribe to most people, or people that are listening? Or how about this, people that have like hearing this conversation and be like, whoa, I'd really like to be more of that responsive person. Where would you say to start, or what would you say to do? Yeah, that's a great title. Yeah. We also had, I remember Dr. Rob Kelly was on the show, and it's like when you see an animal under some threat, or maybe an animal that gets hit by a car or something like that, it doesn't get killed, they get up, they shake it off, and then they just come right back to the present moment, and they're not like living that trauma again and again, because they actually we don't have the same brain as them, but just shake it off and keep going, for sure. No ulcers. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah. There you go. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but also, what does it mean to be the student again? I think is be the student. What the student reads, the student tries, the student practices, the student is vulnerable, the student is open, the student is listening. And that's really, and even when you are practicing, I'm still the student. I'm just receiving and listening and doing and letting go of control. And it's just all so important. I've been teaching for a long time, but I consider myself a student first to all these practices. And that's what makes me a powerful teacher. Yeah. Whole book. I know. Yeah. 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 Yeah, the world becomes your teacher. There's something to learn from everybody, from every situation, instead of trying to control or demand or dictate or, you know what I mean, force your will on everything. It's just, that's just defensive, reactive mode, if you will, instead of being open and available and vulnerable and authentic and responsive to the way the world is with you and the way that you are with the world. It's a relationship, and it's like, what do you want that relationship to be? But in order to develop a new relationship, because we've been programmed by our parents, by schools, or maybe you do have a fantastic parent or school system that has really helped you to tap into these more contemplative practices, but most of us have not. It's time to be the student again if you really want to access your full potential, to be honest with you. It's just what it takes. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes discipline. It takes a lot of the other things that we talked about, but where do you start? And could start with reading a great book, could start with meditating, breathing, or just if you're out of shape, just start working your body into shape, and watch how your body wants you to see more health in your mind and in other ways. It's amazing how it all works together. You start one place and it starts open. For me, it just started opening up doors all over the place. Start eating differently, working out differently, being in my relationships differently, being with myself differently, and it's powerful. And then you get back to that unfuckableness that it's just, here I am. This is it. Awesome. One more question, John, or what should we do? Should we close out? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Wow. I think that's great. Yeah. And again, that control is such an illusion. It's just, what is it? And what do? We need to basically keep coming back to that reactivity kind of place in order to control everything. Because it's just like we're holding on so tight that if something comes into our awareness that doesn't match whatever we feel as we try to control the situation, that's when we get defensive, that's when we get anger, that's when we lash out, that's when we start shaming or putting someone down or acting in a way in order to regain that control, and you just end up messing everything up instead of just listening, being, going along for the ride. We talked earlier about letting the world be your teacher. You know what I mean? Just, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know what I would like to happen, but maybe it's not going to happen the way I want it to happen in my mind, but letting go, going with the flow. I love you said that. That's huge, because I feel that control way too often, especially when it's just got to let go. And the way that I continually learn to let go is meditating, breathing, and just feeling that wonderful sense of ease when I'm in that space. And then also and again, come back to what we said earlier, is the trust and from the experience of being in the flow, and then coming out the other side and be like, wow, that was an awesome ride. And actually I gained a hell of a lot of knowledge, a hell of a lot of skills from that experience. What's next? Awesome. Yeah. 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 No, it's all good. Thanks, John. There you go, exactly. No, I just wanted a big thank you, Charles. Really appreciate your time and all your wisdom and bringing it today. It was just so informative and really talk about a flowing conversation, like really beautiful, and really appreciate your time. And anyone out there listening, please hit up Charles' course on Insight Timer. We have a bunch of meditations on our platform as well. Oh, and also I have a weekly meditation, live meditation Insight Timer, 5 p.m. Wednesday, tonight, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to drop in 30 minutes of breathwork and meditation, please just join in. Send me a message if you want. It's on my LinkedIn. It's on my Instagram. But thank you guys. Wonderful. Great way. And thank you for bringing us to season 7. Awesome way to start this season. Thank you everyone for listening. And that's it. John, take it away, my brother. Peace, guys. Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
It's part of the show. Great to be here. So excited to be here with you all, our audience, and here with you, Charles and Will, for our show today. Very excited to be kicking off season 7. It feels weird when we're in between seasons and we're like, what are we supposed to be doing right now? Oh, the show's on a break. So it's great to be back and recording again. As far as the show and what it is we do, we have this show regularly, weekly, right? But we also have some meditation and breath practices that are part of the podcast feed. So if you go on the podcast, if you go on our YouTube channel, you can actually listen to the meditations on there. Some of those are also on Insight Timer. And Will and I are also taking this season to release new meditations for you all as an audience to help cope with stress, anxiety, to help prepare for your daily life. Whatever the case may be, we're going to be putting out new meditations every week, alternating between myself and Will. So we've got you covered. All our meditations, the breath practices, they're in there on the YouTube site, they're in there on the show, and they're on Insight Timer as well. And then we also, as we always ask, we ask you to help us to grow the show. Not just to grow the show, but we want to grow the show so that we can grow our impact, our positive impact that we're having on people's lives. If you're able to, take a screenshot of what you're watching right now, or if you're listening to the podcast, take a screenshot of that and post that on social media, because that's going to help us to grow the show. Again, to grow the impact. And then follow us on YouTube and subscribe. That'd be great. Let's see. That all said, we're going to jump into our opening practice, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation with Charles Freligh here in a second. So it's spelled Freligh. For those watching and listening later, if you want to look him up, we'll make sure we share all his contact information. But anyhow, now that we're all jazzed up, and Will, sorry for busting your balls, you're probably anxious now, but now we've done that, let's ground ourselves. We'll ground ourselves, and we love to say that it's for our audience, but truth be told, it's really for me and Will to calm ourselves down as we get into this live show. We love you all for tuning in. Thank you very much. And now, let's get comfortable, whatever that looks like and feels like for you, whatever that feels like physically and emotionally for you. I invite you to assume that comfortable position, comfortable and safe. And let's just bring our attention to our breath, noticing the rise and fall of our chest and belly as we inhale and exhale. And we'll do 5 concentrated and intentional breaths together. Begin by exhaling, bringing your navel to your spine. Nice deep breath in. Hold at the top and release. That's 1. Deep breath in, filling up from the bottom to the top. Hold and relax. 2. Deep breath in, ideally through your nose, filling all the way up to the top. Hold and let it go. 3. Deep breath in, hold, release. 1 more, deep breath in, filling all the way up. Extra sip at the top. Hold and relax. And as you release this final breath, roll your shoulders, maybe wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, bring some micro movements back into your body. And if your eyes were closed, we invite you to go ahead and open them back up and come into this space, your time, right here and right now. Again, very excited to get into this episode with Charles. Charles, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited for this. Let's just jump right in. A little background for the audience before we get to the questions. I asked Charles to come on this show because I was getting back into my reactive self. And I personally went on Insight Timer and I looked up reactivity versus responsiveness, and his show, or his course, I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's 10 different sessions. Learning to respond without reactivity popped up. And I went through it, this is maybe 6 months ago. And I really loved the way that Charles related, yes, the reactivity versus responsiveness we've talked about on the show before with Dr. Seth Hickerson, but I loved the metaphors Charles used, the way that he taught responsiveness versus reactivity, and how to tap into that responsive side. So I reached out to him on Insight Timer, and he is good enough to actually make some time in his day to join us to share his journey to what he's got going on and share the difference between responsiveness and reactivity so that we can tap into that responsive side. So that all said, Charles, why are you personally so invested in this work, and what is your grand vision for the work that you do? Sure. 100%. Been there myself. Nice. Yeah. Yes. Steve Jobs says something to the effect of, if you can't connect the dots looking forward, you have to connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust in your heart or your intuition that it somehow already knows what you want to be and what you want to do. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, and it sounds very similar to what me and Will are doing. Like, people always ask, so what's the goal with the show? We're like, I don't know. We're just a million different goals. Yeah, a million listeners and a million different goals. But our heart and our intuition are what guides us to this. And at the end of every season, we're like, oh, we attained this. Whether it's number of listeners or viewers, that's one thing. But it's more the people who message us privately, and they're like, I needed to hear that very message today, and what you guys put out changed the course of my day, the course of my week, the course of my life, which sounds grandiose, but little things can really change the way that you're carrying yourself. And meditation and mindfulness seems like a little thing, but it truly, coming to my experience, has changed my life for the better. And I've said this 1,000 times on the show, it changed my life for the better, but it also quite literally saved my life. I'm very excited to be sharing these practices with our listeners, with our audience, and the vision continually changes. Thanks for that, man. But one thing that you mentioned in there is you have these feelings, these experiences, and then you try not to label them. And that brings me to something that you talk about in your course on Inside Timer. You discuss the difference between words, like the letters that form these words, and the sounds that we say and sounds that we hear, and the concepts that these words represent. And then you further talk about curiosity versus interpretation. What do you mean by this, and why is it important to understand that? Sure. Yeah. Sure. It does. 100%. I love that. Yeah. Go for it. Yeah, go for it, Will. And you speak about that in your course. You use a metaphor of the boiling pot. It's like a pressure cooker, and if we continually just add these little stressors throughout the day and we never release that pressure, we're going to explode at some point, or the lid's going to pop off that boiling pot and it's going to overflow. And it's the release that we need, and that can be through that big time release in the morning of a meditative practice, and then maybe a mindful meal through the day, turning off your phone for a few minutes and just sitting out in nature and taking in the sights and the sounds and the sensations, being mindful, living mindfully, not necessarily a meditation, getting physical. Yeah, 100%, having some type of release and identifying those releases that work for you and then implementing them in your life. But I want to talk again, man, your metaphors are awesome. The closed fist, the boiling pot, and everything else. And in your course, again, this is not meant to be a huge plug for Charles's course, but I do swear I thought it was fantastic. And I'm going to go back into it again here after this. You talk about the pause button, and we've talked a little bit about a metaphor similar to that in the past, how important that pause button is, but you can't live on the pause button. You have to eventually press play, noticing when you're like a boiling pot and letting some of that steam go. And then you talk about the thoughts being like trains pulling into a train station. You're on a platform and you can step onto the trains, but then you have to be aware that you're on that train and you're going to go where it takes you. So if it's not where you want to go, you have to step off that train and step back onto the platform. Can you tell us a little bit about those metaphors, what they mean a little bit more than I did, and then tell us how we rewire our brain to see things differently so that we can respond and be less reactive? Yeah. Sharpening. So do we. Yep. Right. Yep. Nice. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I can't help but have the image in my mind, Tom Cruise during a Mission Impossible or something, and he's on top of the train as it's about to go under a tunnel, and this train is causing him so much anxiety and stress in his life. If he had just never climbed on the top of that train. Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, I've read it. Yeah, basically how, they're just chill all day and then, maybe a lion comes and they get all anxious, but then when the lion goes away, they're back at the watering hole and all they're thinking about is the watering hole. They're not worried about the fact that a lion just chased them. They're not worried about the fact that a lion may chase them. They don't get an ulcer because all they're thinking about is the here and now. Yeah. Yep. Sam Harris. I recommend it. And even when you become the quote unquote master, a true master is always learning, is always open to learning new ways of doing things, learning new methods. The true master is always learning. So it's great to find another person that loves reading. Will and I love reading. We've had plenty of authors on the show to the point where there's times it's, oh my gosh, another book. But it's fantastic. It keeps us focused. And I love what you said there about reading, and that there's sometimes when I'll be reading and I'll catch myself and I've read an entire page and I don't even remember what I've just read. I'm like, oh, I got to come back to the here and now. I've got to refocus on the words that are in front of me. So it is, in a way, whether you're reading about meditation or not, whether you're reading about these practices or not, you may be reading a romance novel, I don't know. Whatever it is that you read, when you notice that your mind has wandered off to then and there rather than here and now. Granted, in reading, you're going to be taken to then and there, but that's within the context of the reading rather than the context of your life. The here and now for your context of your life is sitting there reading a book and paying attention to the words, the letters, the symbols that we have formed to represent words on the page, and it brings you into the here and now. So I love that you're using reading as a meditative practice in and of itself. Right. Yeah. Right. For sure. Yeah, I've got one more question. I think we've touched on quite a bit of it. And if there's too much overlap, you just let me know. But as a therapist, a couple of questions. One, do you feel that men feel more comfortable with men therapists or with female therapists? And then the second one is, as a therapist, what are some of the most common problems you hear from men, and then what do you recommend for them? Yeah, sure. It does depend. Oh, yeah, tons. Yep. Right. It does. Yeah. That seems like a pretty good place to wrap it up, man. There's several mic drops there from either you yourself, Charles, or someone that you've quoted. Definitely going to have to go back and pull some powerful stuff from this episode to share with our audience who may not have tuned in live. That said, we're going to come up on our final grounding practice here in a second, and I'll turn that over to you, Charles, to lead that. But I want to give you an opportunity to plug anything that you're working on. How can people find you on social media, on Insight Timer, the book that you have, and the other book that you're working on? How can people find you if they want to? Same. Sure. Right on. And for those who are listening, it's Charles Freligh, Freligh. Looks like Charles Freligh, but it's Freligh. I'm not making fun of you, Will. You didn't say that. You said Freligh or Freligh. I don't even remember what you said, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because you know what? All that is a representation of a last name that we have assigned context to. There you go. All right, for our audience, if you're going to jump off right now, just before the final grounding practice, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, and thanks for always supporting the show. That said, we would love you to share this show, share this episode with anyone that you feel can benefit from it. Your friends, your family, your colleagues, whoever. Maybe it's your next door neighbor. Hopefully your next door neighbor is a friend, but whoever needs to hear this so that they can learn to live with responsiveness without that reactivity. Please share it with them, then give us a like, a review, and then follow us on YouTube. And all that out of the way, I'll turn it over to Charles to wrap this show up in a nice bow with that grounding practice, brother. Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much for that, Charles. And I find it difficult to do nothing. It's hard to do that, but that was refreshing just to pause and not think about what's happening next hour, next day, earlier today. Just be in this moment and not even feel like having to do anything right now, right here. So, Charles, thank you again so much for being here. Will, any closing comments, brother? Yes. All right. Yeah, that's it. Until next time, thank you very much. Take care. Peace. All right. Yeah, I think he may have left. Yeah, he did. All good, man. But great guy. Really in touch with the same stuff that we talk about. So I really enjoyed that episode. Yes. Oh, yeah. Thank you. I gotta stop that.